Good afternoon, class. Uh, my final presentation is going to be on the biblical influence on Thomas Jefferson. The period of the American Revolution is packed with both tremendous stories and larger-than-life figures. The founding fathers of the United States were a varied group of men, and among them, some impact thoughts and conversation to this very day. Thomas Jefferson was one of those founders who continues to capture the minds of those of us today. Jefferson achieved a great many accomplishments in his life. As an example, he founded the University of Virginia, he was the third president of the United States, and he co-authored the Declaration of Independence. These three accomplishments that he actually had put on his gravestone. As a result, as research continues on the founding era, one question that comes to mind is if the United States was founded on Christianity, Christian principles, or not. This is a divisive question and contains good arguments on each side. Many who posit that Christianity was not at the foundation of this country look to men like Jefferson as their example. Jefferson was known to be a rationalist and even influenced by deism. Yet while Jefferson did embrace rationalism, it's my position that his worldview was also shaped by a biblical understanding of reality. So with that, and to prove that point, let's first look to understand the culture in which Jefferson lived. Thomas Kidd begins this by going back to the Great Awakening of the 1730s and 1740s. This Great Awakening was a profound social upheaval in the history of colonial America. This shook the American Christianity to its core and was revitalizing religious commitment, even as it threatened colonial America's institutional churches. This first American Revolution, this Great Awakening, would herald the political revolution of 1776, according to Thomas Kidd. In fact, he moves on to say that in 1765, the legacy of revivalism, the legacy of that Great Awakening, was one element of the religious zeal fueling the controversy of Britain over the Stamp Act. Another historian looking into the same era, the 18th century, and in particular the influence of the Great Awakening, would be Patricia Bonomi. She argues in her book, Under the Cope of Heaven, that there was a rising vitality in religious life in the 18th century, and that religion was not in decline, but instead experiencing a period of proliferation and growth. Bonomi also turns to numbers to prove her point, and she states that recent estimates suggest that a majority of adults in the 18th century colonies were regular church attenders. Bonomi's scholarship creates an understanding of the culture in which Jefferson lived. Understanding the culture in which Jefferson lived and worked helps to understand Jefferson himself. Another element of the time period was not only the religious sentiments, but also other emerging and contentious views. Bonomi elaborates on this and states the influential ideas that were reaching an increasing number of Americans was that of Enlightenment rationalism and continental pietism. It is this intersecting of rationalism and pietism that is important in gaining insight into Jefferson and the culture in which he emerged. Dustin Gish has a few things to say in this same topic. He states that the influence of biblical religion has frequently been overlooked by political scientists. For example, nearly 2 decades have passed since a groundbreaking article published in a premier journal of political science reported the results of an ambitious study of public expressions of political thought during the era of the American Revolution and founding. The author of that article reported, after this author read a vast array of printed material from 1760 through 1805 that included pamphlets, treatises, newspapers, articles, and books, that the most cited text in the political writings at that time period was the Bible. The more research is completed, the more obvious it is how the culture of the 18th century was permeated with biblical text. The Bible was the text that influenced the thoughts of virtue and morality and our understanding of all of those things in the 18th century. So if this is the culture in general, the culture overall, how about some turning to some specific people, some contemporaries of Jefferson? First, I'd like to look to Patrick Henry. After all, Patrick Henry, for quite a while, was friends with Jefferson and a fellow Virginian. Daniel Dreisbach shows that Patrick Henry deployed biblical phrases and Bible-like language to great rhetorical effect, communicating the gravity of the moment, the righteousness of the patriots' cause, and the promise of God's sustaining aid. Charles Cohen, another historian, writes of Patrick Henry's famous "Give me liberty or give me death" speech, and states that the speech provides a detailed account of the biblical references Henry used within the speech. Cohen states that through invocations of religious significance, appeals to God, and adept use of the Bible, a political address becomes a lay sermon. He states that the great and arduous struggle for liberty is not a mundane but a holy cause, and that it concerns one's temporal salvation. That provides great insight to the use of political figures that were contemporaries of Jefferson. Going back to some comments of Dustin Gish, who states that almost every literate American in the Revolutionary era and beyond could follow and understand biblical references when applied in a political context. Evidence of this would be that of Patrick Henry. Of course, while biblical religion continued to hold a dominant place in the hearts and minds of the American people, the founders were also fully engaged in the Age of Enlightenment. Let's look to another contemporary of Jefferson who could exemplify this, that of Thomas Paine. Yet when he wrote Common Sense, we can look within that and look to one of his illustrations. In it, he says that the children of Israel had been being oppressed by the Midianites, and Gideon marched against them with a small army, and victory through the divine interposition decided in his favor, in Gideon's favor. This is a prime example of even Thomas Paine, who would be much more in the rationalist camp, not in the Christian camp, in his most influential tract of Common Sense, using biblical language, using biblical stories to prove his political position. It seems evident that the culture Jefferson lived in was greatly influenced by Scripture. Contemporaries of Jefferson, those who both might be devout, like Henry, and those who would likely be more likely to reject Christianity and be of the rationalist persuasion, like that of Thomas Paine, were not only familiar with the Bible, but they used it for their teaching purposes and to influence those to their political position. Well, let's look to Jefferson himself. As the American Revolution was approaching, Jefferson had written a summary view of the rights of British Americans. In this work, he established the reason for American grievance against Britain. In it, he references people in America in their relationship to those in Great Britain. And this is what he says: "Every individual of whom is equal to every individual of them, in virtue, in understanding, and in bodily strength." What becomes interesting in this is Jefferson's use of a word like virtue. Again, it's in this culture, using words like virtue in political dialogue, using references to morals, that we can see is being derived from a base that understands these terms to be those as defined by the Bible. Jefferson, also being known as one of the authors or the main author of the Declaration of Independence. Often people look to a more overt use of biblical rhetoric in the Declaration, or at least biblical principles. And in reflecting on the Declaration, Jefferson said that he did not consider it part of my charge to invent new ideas altogether, and to offer no sentiment which had ever been expressed before. I know only that I turned to neither book nor pamphlet while writing it. So while talking about the Declaration, Jefferson admits that while he did not turn to another text to write it, he pulled from the ideas of the culture and expressed that in the Declaration of Independence. Thus, I think it's fair to say that that is representative of other ideas' influence in Jefferson. So even those, such as Thomas Paine, outside of the Christian faith, were very familiar with the Bible. The morals, the ethics derived from Scripture were well known and praised by those living in the 18th century America. With these things in mind, it should be well understood that the Bible is paramount in the foundation of American freedom. To be sure, there are also other ideas instrumental in American freedom. I don't want to take away from other influences. The primary purpose is to just state the point that it becomes more and more clear that the Bible is influential in the culture in the day, and thus also extraordinarily influential in the life of Jefferson himself. So, while Patrick Henry wrote to Thomas Jefferson and said, "Do you remember any instance where tyranny was destroyed and freedom established on its ruins among a people possessing so small a share of virtue and public spirit?" We can be sure that not only was Henry defining virtue in a biblical term, but that Jefferson understood Henry by that same influence of Christianity. Thank you.